3. Hello everyone, my name is Mukhametkarim Arilan
And my name is Syzdyk Mansia.
and we are from 10D.
Today we are going to share our artwork projects. So let's start.
Arilan, can you explain the meaning behind the symbols you chose and how they relate to your artistic intention? And can you answer how did your use of color, shape, and layout support the symbolic meaning of your pattern?
So my final printed pattern includes two symbolic elements that represent personal and spiritual identity. The first is the Chinese character Dao, which means the way. This symbol is deeply philosophical and relates to a person's life journey or spiritual path. I choose it because it mirrors my own sense of direction and inner guidance. The second symbol I created is more abstract. It resembles rays or waves spreading out from a center. This abstract form represents the soul's energy, radiating outward into the world. Together, these two symbols tell the story of how my identity is shaped, but is constantly expanding and evolving through life experiences. In terms of visual elements, I used yellow and purple for both their aesthetic contrast and symbolic meaning. Yellow represents light, warmth, and the soul vitality. Purple stands for introspection, spirituality, and inner strength. These two colors together express the dual nature of identity, the part we show to the world, and the deeper part that we keep within. I also made a deliberate choice to use soft, curved shapes to communicate calmness, harmony, and emotional openness. The roundness of the shapes helps avoid tension, making the artwork feel peaceful and balanced with matched by my theme. I organized these symbols in a circular radial layout like a sunburst or mandala. This composition placed the Dao symbol at the center, symbolizing the soul or life path, while the abstract rays extend outward in symmetrical repetition. This layout was chosen to communicate the idea that identity begins internally and radiates into the external world. The repetition of the symbols symbolizes personal growth and consistency. I wanted to show that my identity isn't just a single event or idea. It's a continuous journey shaped by repeated thoughts, values, and decisions. The part of my artwork I find most successful is the way the two symbols blend conceptually and visually. They complement each other and work together to form an unified and meaningful whole. I feel that the interaction between them reflects how different parts of my personality, my values, emotions, and decisions came together to form who I am. And there's a strong sense of harmony in the design, which helps communicate the inner peace and direction I wanted to express. If I were to improve anything in my work, I will be the stamping quality. Some areas of my print were too dark or blurry, mostly because I applied too much ink or pressed unevenly. In the future, I will use a sponge roller to apply ink more evenly and experiment with transparent layers to create more visual depth. These layers could represent the multiplied dimensions of identity, some visible and some hidden. I believe my artwork successfully communicates a sacred or spiritual idea. Even if the viewer doesn't recognize the character Dao, the layout, color harmony, and symmetrical balance convey a meditative spiritual feeling. The calm and reflective mood of the pattern gives it a sense of sacredness. The radical composition in particular feels symbolic or something greater, like a spiritual force or inner truth radiating from the center of the self. I also used space, repetition, and color very intentionally to support the symbolic meaning. The open spaces between symbols provide a sense of air and breathing room, which reflects the spiritual freedom. Repetition communicates the rhythm of life and the idea that identity forms gradually over the time. So the yellow and purple contrast adds energy while also suggesting balance between outward light and inward thought. Of course, my pattern can be interpreted differently by other people, and I actually appreciate that. Some might see a sun, a flower, or even just a decorative mandala without knowing the meaning behind the symbols. That's meaningful to me because identity also works this way. Different people see different sides of me, so depending on their perspective. The openness to interpretation reinforces the theme that identity is complex and personal. Finally, I made several deliberate visual choices to enhance the sacred message. So this include using radial symmetry, limiting the color palette, and avoiding sharp and chaotic shapes. I know these decisions worked because of how people responded to the pattern. They said it felt calm, complete, and meaningful. That showed me that the symbolic and emotional intention behind my artwork came through successfully.
Thank you. What was one important technical skill or concept you learned while working on this project? And how does this project help you grow as an artist and understand your identity better?
So, one of the most important things I learned during this project was how to carve a reverse for stamp printing. In my first attempt, I carved the Dao character exactly as it appears when written. But when I stamped it, it came out mirrored and unreadable. That was frustrating at first, but it taught me a valuable lesson. When you carve stamps, you have to mentally flip the image. So I then redrew the symbol in reverse and recarved it. And this time it worked. That moment taught me not just a technical skill, but also to think ahead and plan my process better. My stamping also improved over time as I explored different materials. I started with traditional stamp ink, but it soaked into the eraser and blurred the lines. So I experimented with acrylic paint, gouache, and even markers. Surprisingly, I got the cleanest results from acrylic markers and highlighters. This gave me sharper, more consistent prints without soaking through the surface. I also learned the importance of cleaning the stamp between each use. If I didn't, the dry paint would harden and ruin the next print. Cleaning with soap and water after each stamp helped keep my design accurate and clean. There were definitely challenges along the way. The mirrored carving was the first. The second was getting the materials right and controlling the stamping pressure. Some of my prints were too light and others too dark. Instead of giving up, I kept testing different approaches and adjusted my technique until I found what worked. This process of trial and error really boosted my confidence and helped me feel like an artist who solves problems creatively, not just someone following steps. So the project also gave me a chance to reflect on personal and cultural identity. Although the Dao symbol is from Chinese culture and not my own, I felt deeply connected to its meaning. It helped me realize that cultural symbols can still be meaningful across cultures when we connect with their message. Through this symbol, I was able to express ideas about inner peace, direction, and soulfulness. It made me realize that identity is something we build through meaning, not just heritage. My entire approach to art has changed because of this project. I used to focus mostly on the final look, whether something was pretty or detailed enough. Now I think much more about meaning, process, and intention. I have learned that experimenting, testing, and reflecting are just as important as the final product. I also learned how the small choices like to curve in a line or at the position of a symbol can completely change the message of the piece. There are skills I can plan to carry into the future creative projects. Whenever I carving stamps, painting, or designing something digital, I understand the value of planning ahead, testing materials, working from mistakes, and thinking symbolically. I want my future art to keep expressing something meaningful, not just to look good. This project helped me take that step as an artist. How does your final artwork reflect who you are?
My final artwork, titled Harmony in Contrast, is not just a visual composition made of stamps. It's a reflection of my personal journey, my growth as an artist, and the way I see the world and myself. At the beginning of the project, I didn't fully understand that I would need to create a full composition. I simply started carving symbols that I felt connected to on a personal level. That's why the eye was one of the first symbols I made. To me, the eye represents awareness, reflection, and the way a person sees the world. I've always been someone who notes the details, observes people and emotions, and thinks deeply before speaking or acting. I think this symbol shows how I don't just look outward, but also inward, also trying to understand myself. The spiral is another symbol that reflects something personal, my growth. I haven't always felt confident in art or even in my ideas. In the past, I often thought art was only about beauty or talent, but through this unity I realized that meaning and intention are just as powerful. The spiral in my work shows that growth isn't always linear. It has turns and setbacks, but it always moves forward. That's how I've grown in this project, from uncertainty and symbols to creating a full, meaningful pattern. The DNA-like striped shapes represents uniqueness and complexity. I am someone who's made of many influences, family, culture, thoughts, emotions, and I think the symbol shows how those things combine to shape identity. The fact that I use these shapes on both sides of the artwork reflects balance between different parts of myself. Even my process says something about me. I didn't just use standard tools, I used what I had. Cuticle knife, a ruler, even a kitchen knife sometimes. This reflects how I learned to adapt and be resourceful, not waiting for perfect tools or conditions to create something meaningful. I experimented, I felt, I changed directions. The fact that I didn't plan the full layout at the start also reflects something about me. I often begin with emotions or instinct and later build structure. Without planning it, I created a composition that visually represents identity, the face. Built from that's why I named the piece Harmony and Contrast. It reflects my journey, my dualities, and my ability to bring different parts of myself into one unified vision. This artwork is not than stamps on paper. It's my story, one I carved, printed, and discovered along the way.
So, what artistic choices did you make in terms of materials, colors, and composition? And how did these choices help you grow as an artist?
I chose an eraser because it's soft yet firm enough to call out intricate details when carving. It's also very easy to work with, making it perfect for creating clear, clean-cut designs. The eraser's texture allowed me to experiment with different shapes and designs without worrying about it falling apart too quickly. Since it's a common and inexpensive material, it gave me the opportunity to explore new tools and methods without any major limitations. Additionally, the erasing material was forgiving enough for me to make corrections and adjustments easily, which was especially useful for someone like me who had a minimal experience with this medium before. Other materials could have been used include potato, lino, or rubber balls. While these materials can also productive good stamps, I decided against them for a few reasons. Potato, for instance, is not very durable, and the designs tend to get messy after a few prints, especially when working with more detailed symbols. Lino blocks require specialized carving tools, and I wasn't sure if I could achieve the level of detail I wanted with them. I wanted a more straightforward approach, and the erasers allowed me to do just that without needing complex tools and advancing techniques. Before this project, I had some experience carving soap. I had worked with it for a different creative project, and although it was a good start, it wasn't the best medium for detailed designs. Soap tends to crumble or break easily, which limited my ability to make precise cuts. This project introduced me to carving erasers, which allowed me to achieve more defined, intricate lines and symbols. It was a step in terms of precision and control. I used a variety of tools to carve my stamps. The primary tools were a cuticle knife, a metal ruler, a utility knife, and occasionally a kitchen knife. The cuticle knife was great for detailed carving work, while the metal ruler helped me keep my lines straight and accurate. The utility knife came in handy for larger cuts, and the kitchen knife sewed unconventional worked well when I didn't have the other tools at hand. Each of these tools offered different advantages, and I enjoyed experimenting with them to see which worked best for each stage of the carving process. The utility knife was more useful for larger areas, but I needed more careful handling to avoid damaging the erasers. Since this was a new process for me, I had to practice a lot to get comfortable with the tools and figure out the best way to apply pressure. And once I got the hang of it, the carving process became much smoother. The main challenge I faced was keeping the lines clean and sharp. Since erasers are soft, it's easy to accidentally carve too deeply or too lightly, which affects the print quality. Another challenge was creating designs that were balanced and visually appealing when stamped. I initially carved some symbols that didn't work well together, so I had to rethink how I arranged and aligned them to create a cohesive composition. I achieved accuracy by being patient and working slowly, ensuring that I made small controlled cuts with each stroke. I also used a metal ruler to guide my lines, which helped keep them straight and consistent. For more detailed areas, I used the cuticle knife carefully and focused on controlling the depth of my cuts. Testing was crucial to ensure the stamps worked effectively and to identify any changes I needed to make before moving forward with the final piece. I started by carving the symbols that felt most personal to me, symbols that represented parts of my identity and things I felt connected to. The eye symbolizes perception, insight, and spirituality, while the spiral represents growth and transformation. These symbols were deeply meaningful to me, and carving them helped me connect more with the overall process and concept of the project. I tried to balance the colors across the composition to avoid heavy areas of only one tone. For example, I placed red and blue on opposite sides to create a sense of dialogue between them. Black was used mainly for forming and defining the eye and spiral, where clarity was most important. The symmetry of the layout, along with repeated elements on each side, created balance. The face-like structure naturally draws the viewer's attention to the center, while the mirrored sides keeps the visual weight even. The different stamp sizes or alternating colors also help maintain equilibrium and make the composition feel whole. The color choices highlight emotional and symbolic contrast, stillness with energy, thought with action, clarity with mystery. They support the idea of harmony in contrast by showing how opposing elements can coexist. Without the color contrast, the meaning of the pattern wouldn't be as strong or visually engaging.
How have you grown as an artist during this unit?
This unit helped me grow not only technically but emotionally. At the start, I didn't feel like a real artist. I thought art had to be perfect and beautiful. I've learned that what matters most of the idea, the intention, and how honestly you express yourself. I became more confident with my tools, more thoughtful in my designs, and more open to experimenting without fear of mistakes. I learned how to communicate through visual symbolism, how colors, shapes, and composition can express identity, emotions, and my personal story. I discovered that even small details like how deep I cut a line can completely change the mood of the print. The most powerful lesson was understanding that contrast isn't something to fix, it's something to use. My project is full of contrast, curved with sharp lines, dark with bright colors, structured with intuition. Yet they all come together in harmony. The idea mirrors who I am and how I want to approach my future creative work.
Mansia.
And we are from Syzdyk.
Today we are excited. Да, нормально.
Окей, Syzdyk, ну давайте опять.
Нет, пофиг, пусть это
Нет,
будет смешной кадр.